lost.
So is there any kind of scenario where you could see yourself, a corporation, making an offer, proposing some kind of revenue sharing that would convince you to allow fracking in your territory?
Well, I mean, okay. Do I see an offer that would that would compel me to sign off? I don't, there's a reason I'm not in leadership. I don't envy leaders, whether First Nations or people like in this building here in Parliament. You have to make tough calls. My issue with impact benefit agreements and revenue sharing is, okay, let's talk about revenue sharing, but only when you can properly quantify the long-term costs. No one knows how much it costs to clean up an aquifer. The potential costs of cleaning up after Mount Polley, the largest spill in Canadian history, a tailing pond breach, billions, far beyond any possible revenue sharing that would ever be offered by entities like Imperial Metals. So I would be willing to have that conversation. I have in my previous life before I went to law school and became a lawyer. That was one of my jobs, is negotiating IBAs on behalf of my nation. And the problem was okay, you'll give us some money up front. What's the long-term impact? What do you do about endocrine disruptors? Do you want to put a price tag on a birth defect like mine? These are the questions that leadership has to confront. Is there a dollar value that accounts for a child being born deformed? And these are the real risks at issue. And in my view, those who would say impact benefits, revenue sharing, I mean, fine, that's relevant, that's important. My family works in the industry, I respect that. But I would not put those down and quantify them without being able to quantify the impacts as well. And we're not there yet. The peer-reviewed science is illustrating quite clearly that we do not know all of what we don't even know. I mean, it sounds so trite, but we don't even understand the potential impacts. 20, 30-year gap between toxic substances and regulation. Peer-reviewed science. The knowledge to action gap is huge in the modern age, and that's why Parliament and regulators need to step in proactively, and that's not happening on this issue, and it's to the detriment of all Canadians. So is there any other questions? Well, sure, yeah.
And maybe I can just make a quick point related to your question about the chemicals. So the federal government does actually have a list of the chemicals that are used commonly or that were used in Quebec as well as the U.S. Council of Canadians did an access to information request, and we got a list of 265 chemicals. Environment Canada looked at these chemicals under the Chemicals Management Plan. 13 of them were assessed. Half of them didn't meet criteria for further assessment, which means that nearly half of them, over half of them actually, have not been assessed by Health Canada and Environment Canada. So when we ask the question of what the federal government can do, that's one concrete step that they could take in assessing public safety of these fracking chemicals. I've looked at some of the chemicals that have not been assessed, and they raise major concerns. Some of them are toxic. Some of them are endocrine disruptors, are carcinogenic. And if you look at the medical data safety sheets, they raise serious concerns. So there is information that the federal government has, and it's there. We're not seeing any meaningful action. There's also concerns about the gutting of environmental legislation that we saw a couple years ago, where there were one example was the change in Canadian Environmental Assessment Act that canceled 3,000 environmental assessments. Many of them were oil and gas projects on Indigenous lands. Some of them were actually one related to a water application in Fort Nelson First Nation that was a request to withdraw millions of liters of water every day. And so there are concrete steps that the federal government can take, and we're really hoping that politicians and federal leaders step up and do that. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, guys. Cheers. Whew.